Forget the headlines surrounding Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, and his latest fashion choices. January 3rd, 2026, at precisely 2:01 in the morning, U.S. military choppers descended upon a governmental facility in the Venezuelan capital. Before half an hour elapsed, Nicolás Maduro, a leader who'd weathered endless economic penalties, civil unrest, and international condemnation, found himself restrained and airborne toward a U.S. naval vessel. Yet the crucial detail most observers overlooked wasn't immediately obvious. Maduro himself wasn't the target. The narcotics-related terrorism accusations, while official, weren't the genuine motivation. Beijing was the real focus. After dedicating years to examining global power struggles, what transpired in Venezuela represents far more than an isolated operation. It marks the initial strike in a considerably broader campaign. This is the Donroe Doctrine in action. Those tempted to dismiss this as merely another instance of Trump projecting strength domestically should reconsider. What follows will demonstrate why this could represent the most significant transformation in U.S. international strategy since the conclusion of the Cold War ended. During the period when American resources and reputation were hemorrhaging in Iraq, Afghanistan, and more recently Ukraine, a remarkable shift occurred within its traditional sphere of influence. Beijing's approach to Latin America wasn't invasion. Their methodology proved considerably more sophisticated. They purchased influence systematically. The data reveals an extraordinary pattern. Back in 2000, commercial exchange between China and Latin American nations barely registered, totaling roughly $12 billion. Fast forward to 2024, and that figure reached $518 billion. We're examining a 40-fold expansion across just 24 years. At present, Beijing stands as the primary commercial partner for Brazil, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, and Argentina. Stated differently, China has successfully supplanted the United States as the dominant trading partner for every significant South American economic power. Yet commercial figures remain somewhat abstract. Consider the tangible implications on the ground. November 20th, 24 witnessed China inaugurating the Chancay port facility in Peru. This wasn't a modest undertaking. The discussion involves a $3.5 billion deepwater port complex, predominantly controlled by COSCO, a Chinese government-affiliated enterprise featuring completely automated cranes designed to accommodate vessels exceeding Panama Canal capacity. The strategic importance becomes clear when you understand that Changsha establishes a direct shipping lane connecting Shanghai to South America while entirely circumventing North American port infrastructure. Maritime journeys previously requiring 35 days now complete in 23. Transportation expenses declined by 20%. China's diplomatic representative labeled it the Shanghai of South America. Peru's transportation official envisions it becoming the Singapore of Latin America. More remarkably, China and Brazil are currently investigating a railroad connection that would link Changsha to the Atlantic shoreline, effectively creating an alternative to the Panama Canal altogether, establishing a Chinese-administered transcontinental passage through South America. However, port facilities represent merely the observable infrastructure. The unseen variety deserves equal attention. China's State Grid Corporation has channeled $12.5 billion into Brazil's electrical power infrastructure. They've constructed ultra-high voltage transmission networks extending 2,000 kilometers. They currently manage essential segments of the power grid serving Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. For residents of Brazil's most populous metropolitan areas, there exists a legitimate possibility that electrical service continues because of Chinese-built infrastructure. During 2025, State Grid secured a $3.6 billion agreement to construct an additional 1,500-kilometer transmission line linking Brazil's renewable energy, abundant northeast to consumption centers in the southern regions. Their investment plans project an additional $40 billion by 2030. Then consider lithium. The geographical area known as the Lithium Triangle, encompassing Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile, contains 60% of global lithium deposits. This represents the essential battery component enabling electric vehicle production, the foundation upon which Elon Musk's business empire rests. Bolivia individually possesses double Chile's lithium resources. Until quite recently, Bolivia's government lithium enterprise maintained billion-dollar agreements with China's CATL, the planet's dominant battery producer, alongside Russia's Uranium-1. The harsh reality stands clear. Absent South American lithium supplies, America's environmental energy transition becomes impossible. Domestic electric vehicle manufacturing cannot proceed. Tesla, Ford, General Motors all require these materials. Beijing has been systematically securing control over them. Nations might characterize this as simply commerce, merely comparative economic advantage, standard free market operations, yet Washington's interpretation differs fundamentally. From the American national security apparatus's perspective, China's achievements constitute constructing a resource exploitation network within America as a strategic regional zone, while American attention focused elsewhere. The Monroe Doctrine, That 2-century-old principle asserting Western Hemisphere territories fall under American sphere of influence has been effectively dismantled, accomplished not through military hardware or weaponry, but through commercial shipping and electrical infrastructure. Trump's response? He's decided this era has concluded. The Monroe Doctrine carries significant weight, Trump declared hours following Maduro's apprehension. However, we've gone well beyond it, substantially beyond it. They're calling it the Donroe Doctrine now. This wasn't mere boasting. Trump was expressing, in his characteristic manner, a fundamental realignment of American international policy. Examining what the Donroe Doctrine actually signifies in practical application reveals several key components. First, the Western Hemisphere has become officially designated as the foremost priority. Trump's December 20th, 25 National Security Framework, spanning 31 pages, dedicates 5 pages exclusively to Latin American affairs, exceeding coverage of Europe and Asia combined. The document specifically designates non-hemispheric competitors as existential dangers to American security interests. Translation? China represents the target. Russia follows. Iran completes the list. The framework declares America will employ leverage through financial and technological means to persuade nations to decline what it terms low-cost foreign assistance, meaning Chinese capital investment. The ultimatum reads simply, align with us or experience repercussions. Second, the doctrine abandons traditional diplomacy in favor of economic compulsion. April 20th, 25 saw Trump proclaiming Liberation Day, establishing a baseline 10% tariff covering virtually all imported goods. The genuine weapon, however, involves secondary sanctions. Nations maintaining Chinese economic partnerships confront escalating penalties. The communication to Latin American governments couldn't be plainer. Commercial relations with China or commercial relations with us? Select one option. Mexico has already interpreted the message clearly. Facing intense pressure, Claudia Sheinbaum's administration is advancing legislation imposing tariffs reaching 50% on Chinese products, specifically designed to prevent Beijing from utilizing Mexico as an entry point into American markets. Third, military action remains explicitly available. Venezuela demonstrated this isn't empty rhetoric. Venezuela represented the straightforward target, however, a pariah nation lacking powerful allies willing to defend it. The doctrine extends considerably further. Trump's administration has broadened the Monroe Doctrine's geographical coverage from the Aleutian Islands to Greenland and the North American Arctic extending to Antarctica. They've proclaimed expanded military presence throughout the Caribbean, Central America, and Pacific approach routes. Secretary of State Marco Rubio journeyed to Panama shortly after assuming office, issuing an ultimatum: diminish Chinese influence over the Canal or confront American intervention. Panama received the message clearly. Hutchison Holdings, the Hong Kong corporation operating port facilities at both canal termini, is currently divesting those holdings to a BlackRock-led American investment group. Panama has withdrawn from China's Belt and Road Initiative. Fourth, the incentive and penalty framework. Bolivia's newly elected president, Rodrigo Paz, elected late 2025, is already canceling lithium agreements with China and Russia. His foreign affairs minister proclaimed they're pursuing an extended relationship with the United States. Washington's reciprocation includes IMF credit facilities, IDB financing packages, and technology transfer arrangements. Argentina's Javier Milei has emerged as Trump's closest regional partner. When Trump issued threats regarding Panama, Milei expressed his unconditional backing for transferring the canal to Trump. He stood as the sole regional leader refusing to endorse a CELAC declaration defending Panamanian sovereignty. The hemisphere faces sorting. Aligned nations versus adversarial ones, dollar versus yuan. Where does this trajectory lead? Consider the critical pressure points capable of erupting. Mexico occupies the front line position. Mexico represents more than simply America's largest commercial partner. It functions as the crucial element in Chinese supply chain evasion. Chinese corporations have established what amount to phantom manufacturing operations in Mexico, importing components and subsequently re-exporting them to the United States beneath USMCA tariff exemption provisions. The USMCA agreement itself faces renegotiation during 2026. Trump demands not merely trade modifications, but security cooperation effectively granting American operational authority over Mexican territory. The stated justification involves cartels, fentanyl trafficking, and migration flows. Look beyond the surface, however. The authentic issue centers on Mexico representing the final significant obstacle preventing American corporations from achieving complete separation from Chinese manufacturing networks. Trump requires Mexican alignment. Should Mexico fail to comply comprehensively, recall Trump's threat regarding designating cartels as terrorist entities? That wouldn't remain purely symbolic. Such a designation would provide the U.S. military with legal authorization to execute operations inside Mexico, regardless of Mexican governmental consent. Brazil presents an entirely different challenge. This isn't a vulnerable nation subject to intimidation. Brazil ranks as the world's 9th largest economy. It possesses the Amazon, it maintains oil reserves, it produces agricultural exports both America and China require. Lula has articulated clearly he won't select sides. Brazil holds founding BRICS membership. At a May 20th, 25's China Select Summit, Lula stood alongside Xi Jinping proclaiming $3 billion in fresh Chinese renewable energy capital. State Grid continues constructing additional transmission lines. BYD is establishing electric vehicle manufacturing facilities. Brazil simultaneously hosts American investment, however. Its commodity exports reach U.S. markets. Its armed forces maintain traditional connections to Washington. The Trump administration initially imposed 40% tariffs on Brazilian agricultural products. They've subsequently been partially withdrawn. The threat, nonetheless, demonstrated the leverage America possesses. The question becomes whether Brazil can preserve its strategic independence when both superpowers demand alignment. Here's a flashpoint receiving virtually no discussion. Argentina maintains the sole deepwater port capable of supporting Antarctic operations, Ushuaia. China has expanded its Antarctic footprint with multiple research installations and increasing naval operations in waters the United States regards as strategically critical. Under Millet's leadership, Argentina has pivoted dramatically toward Washington. What occurs, however, if a subsequent Argentine administration determines Chinese investment in Patagonian port facilities proves more attractive than American demands? The December 20th, 25 National Security Framework explicitly extends the Monroe Doctrine to Antarctic territories. That's no coincidence. Then there's Nicaragua. This might constitute the most unpredictable element. November 20th, 24 witnessed Daniel Ortega reviving his long-dormant proposal for a Nicaraguan interoceanic canal, 445 kilometers connecting Atlantic to Pacific, dwarfing Panama's 80-kilometer route. The proposal, directed explicitly toward Chinese investors, involves a canal possessing sufficient width and depth to handle megavessels Panama cannot accommodate. A passage completely beyond American influence, a permanent alternative to U.S. control of hemispheric maritime logistics. The estimated cost? Somewhere between $50 billion and $80 billion. Only state-level actors could finance such an undertaking. If China's Panama Canal access becomes untenable under American pressure, Beijing possesses a contingency option already under consideration. Now the question everyone should be posing, why won't China simply withdraw? The answer proves brutally straightforward. Withdrawal isn't possible. China's economic structure centers on manufacturing exports combined with resource imports. Brazilian iron ore remains essential. Chilean copper proves necessary. Bolivian lithium is required. Venezuelan petroleum matters critically. These aren't optional commodities. These represent existential inputs. Should America successfully compel Latin America to choose, and should Latin America predominantly select America, China confronts resource restriction, not instantaneously, not catastrophically, yet gradually, persistently. The raw materials feeding Chinese industrial production become costlier, more difficult to obtain, subject to American authorization. That remains unacceptable to Beijing, which guarantees China will mount resistance. The playbook is already visible. Hours following the Venezuela operation, China executed Justice Mission 2025 military drills, simulating blockades of Taiwan's principal ports. The communication was unmistakable. If you can undertake military operations securing your strategic priorities, we can as well. Beijing analysts are explicitly observing that Trump's willingness to employ force in Latin America furnishes rhetorical justification for comparable Chinese actions in the Taiwan Strait. This represents the escalation spiral. America acts within its hemisphere. China acts within its regional zone. Each action legitimizes the counteraction. Each response elevates the stakes. During 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought humanity to nuclear war's precipice over Soviet missiles stationed 90 miles from Florida. What I'm outlining isn't nuclear in nature, yet in certain respects proves more hazardous because this isn't a singular crisis resolvable through negotiation. This represents structural competition over the global system's economic arteries. No missile exists to remove, no individual concession capable of resolution. Either China maintains its resource access to Latin America, or America reestablishes hemispheric dominance. Both outcomes cannot occur simultaneously. That's precisely why I anticipate we're approaching a prolonged confrontation. Not inevitably hot warfare, though Venezuela demonstrates that possibility exists, yet sustained economic conflict, competing infrastructure projects, proxy political struggles, governmental overthrows and counter-overthrows, effectively a second Cold War, except this time unfolding in America's traditional backyard. One additional actor in this drama requires proper discussion: Latin America itself. For 2 decades, Latin American nations profited from great power rivalry. They could leverage Washington against Beijing, extracting benefits from both parties. Chinese capital filled vacuums that American neglect created. That period is terminating. The Donroe Doctrine compels a choice. The consequences of selecting incorrectly from Washington's viewpoint have become viscerally apparent. Venezuela's Maduro selected incorrectly. He currently occupies a Manhattan detention facility facing narcotics trafficking accusations, while American authorities discuss who will administer his nation. Other leaders are observing carefully. Bolivia's Paz pivoted immediately following his inauguration. Panama's Molino capitulated under pressure. Argentina's Milei required no persuasion whatsoever. Yet universal compliance won't occur. Brazil won't abandon its China relationship without significant resistance. Mexican nationalism runs profoundly deep. Cuba and Nicaragua remain ideologically dedicated to resisting American hegemony. What transpires when immovable objects encounter irresistible forces? If history provides any lesson, it's this. When great powers collide, smaller nations endure suffering. The Cold War's battlegrounds, Korea, Vietnam, Central America, weren't the superpowers themselves. They represented the territories where superpowers conducted proxy warfare. Latin America is approaching the experience of understanding what serving as the battlefield entails. The Donroe Doctrine isn't merely policy. It's a proclamation that neutrality no longer exists as an option, that the multi-alignment era has concluded, that America is, in Trump's personal phrasing, back home and experiencing anger. The question now becomes whether Latin America can navigate its own path, or whether the decision has already been imposed upon it, whether the approaching decade will witness authentic partnership and development, or whether it will witness the return of something more sinister, something more ancient, the shadow of imperial power descending once more over a continent that believed it had finally escaped. The indicators prove discouraging. Military forces aren't advancing, not presently, not universally, yet the pressure continues mounting. The ultimatums are being issued, the selections are being demanded. Within corporate headquarters and presidential residences from Mexico City to Buenos Aires, leaders are computing not what proves morally correct, not what proves equitable, yet what proves survivable. That's the world the Donroe Doctrine has generated. A world where geographical positioning becomes destiny once more, where proximity to America signifies subjection to America, where sovereignty's price might involve economic collapse or worse. China constructed its Latin American strategy upon a fundamental premise that economic engagement would receive protection from the international legal framework, that sovereignty possessed meaning, that commercial exchange could continue regardless of political circumstances. Venezuela demonstrated that premise remained contingent upon Washington's self-restraint. That restraint has terminated. What follows next remains uncertain. One element stands clear, however. The regulations have transformed. The competition has transformed. And Latin America, positioned between two giants, will experience the repercussions. Whether those repercussions resemble prosperity or destruction, partnership or domination, independence or subjugation, that narrative continues being written. The pen no longer rests in Latin American hands, however. Allow me to conclude with one final observation, one that disrupts my sleep as an analyst. The Donroe Doctrine presumes that America can prevail in this competition, that Latin American nations will ultimately select Washington over Beijing, that economic pressure and military threats will suffice to reverse 2 decades of Chinese integration. What if that presumption proves incorrect? China isn't remaining static. During May 2025, Xi Jinping convened the 4th China-CELAC Forum in Beijing. Leaders from throughout Latin America participated. Xi proclaimed a fresh $9 billion credit facility for the region. New free trade agreements were executed with Ecuador and Nicaragua. Colombia joined the Belt and Road Initiative. The figures continue trending in China's direction. Chinese exports to Latin America expanded 8% during 2025, even as exports to the United States declined 18%. Beijing is adapting, discovering new routes, new partners, new methods to preserve its position. And here's the uncomfortable reality. For numerous Latin American nations, China provides something America doesn't. Investment absent conditions, infrastructure absent lectures, partnership absent ultimatums. The United States maintains free trade agreements with 11 Latin American nations. What has America actually constructed in the region? Across the last 20 years, however, where are the American ports, the American transmission lines, the American railways? The answer is nowhere. America provided ideology. China provided concrete. That's the vulnerability at the Donroe Doctrine's core. It's attempting to prevail in a competition through coercion that it already forfeited through neglect. It's demanding loyalty from nations that Washington disregarded for a generation. Certain countries will comply. They lack alternatives. Their geographical proximity to America, their economic dependence, their military vulnerability, these elements make resistance unfeasible. Others will resist, however. They'll discover methods to preserve their Chinese relationships despite American pressure. They'll hedge positions, they'll postpone decisions. They'll manipulate both sides until they're compelled to choose. When that selection arrives, some will choose China. Not because they favor Beijing, not because they embrace Chinese values, yet because China has maintained presence, constructing infrastructure, providing financing, treating them as partners rather than subordinates. The Donroe Doctrine might succeed in reversing certain Chinese influence. It might secure the Panama Canal and the Lithium Triangle and the strategic choke points mattering most to Washington. It might alternatively accelerate precisely what it's attempting to prevent, however. It might consolidate Latin American nationalism against American imperialism. It might generate the variety of anti-American coalition that Washington has feared since the Cold War concluded. History contains numerous hegemonies that overextended, that demanded excessively, that transformed allies into adversaries through arrogance and force. America has functioned as the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere for 2 centuries. That dominance currently faces challenge for the first time since the Soviet Union positioned missiles in Cuba. How America responds to that challenge will determine the coming century, not exclusively for Latin America, yet for the entire global framework. The Donroe Doctrine represents Trump's response: force, coercion, ultimatums, the iron fist inside the velvet glove with the glove currently removed. It might succeed. Empires have been constructed on less substantial foundations. It might alternatively fail, however. Should it fail, should Latin America drift further into Chinese orbit despite everything America deploys against it, then the Donroe Doctrine won't be recalled as a restoration of American power. It will be recalled as the moment America forfeited its backyard. The stakes couldn't prove higher. The outcome couldn't prove less certain. The world is observing to determine what transpires next. One element I know with certainty: this narrative is merely beginning. The opening strikes have been launched. The battle lines are being established. Somewhere in Caracas, in a nation currently under American supervision, the ghost of the Monroe Doctrine has emerged from its grave. It carries a new designation now, and it's hungry.